Welcome, chosen ones. The most dangerous person in the room is not the loudest. It's not the most aggressive. It's not even the one with the receipts. No, the most dangerous person is the one who figured out the game, saw every fake smile, decoded every setup, traced every string of manipulation, and still kept smiling like they didn't. Let that marinate, because, chosen one, when you cracked the code and didn't announce it, when you realized the lies were strategic and the kindness was bait, when you saw through the game and stayed composed, you didn't just ruin their control, you ruined their identity. Some people can't breathe without someone to gaslight. They don't know who they are without someone to dominate. And you used to be their favorite puppet, their emotional project, their go-to supply. But then something happened. You went off script. You stopped dancing to their chaos and started walking in calm. And now they're unraveling like a sweater in a fire. Here's what they don't want you to understand. Psychological manipulation is never random. It's a blueprint, a pattern, a ritual. Research has shown that toxic personalities often operate in 3 stages: idealize, devalue, and discard. First, they love bomb you. Then they break you down. And finally, they toss you aside like you were the problem all along. But here's the twist. They never expected you to develop spiritual infrared vision right in the middle of Act 2. They didn't see it coming when you started observing instead of reacting, when you kept your peace instead of proving your point, when you read the room like a battlefield and smiled anyway. That wasn't confusion, that was clarity. That wasn't weakness, that was authority. You stopped giving them the drama they craved. You stopped participating in their narrative, and instead of being the victim of their script, you became the person who walked off the set mid-scene with your soul intact. And now, they're spiraling, not because you hurt them, but because you saw them. And the worst part for them, you didn't scream, you didn't throw a fit, you just stopped playing. And when someone who depends on your confusion realizes they can't provoke you anymore, their mask melts, their identity collapses, and their script irrelevant. So if this message already has your spirit saying, finally, go ahead and type 777 the comments right now. Let it be a signal that your eyes are open, your discernment is activated, and your energy is no longer available for games. I read every single one, and I love seeing this community stand in truth together. And before we dive into this series, let me pause and say this. To every single one of you who supported this channel through super thanks, thank you. Whether you dropped $1 or $100, your generosity fuels the time, study, and spiritual intensity behind each word we pour into this. You don't have to give to be valued here, but if you have, please know, it means the world to me. And if you haven't, that's okay too. Your presence here, your comments, your healing journey, your engagement, that's sacred too. Now, buckle up, because what we're about to unpack will feel like your favorite psychological thriller, but this time, you're not the one getting played. This time, you're the one who saw the shadow behind the smile, recognized the director behind the curtain, and walked away from the production with your crown on. You're not just surviving anymore. You're studying, you're decoding, you're rising. And now that they can't predict you, they fear you. Let's get into it. God's chosen ones, they tried to manipulate you, but you became their worst fear. Number 1, they never expected you to decode the trap while still inside it. Chosen one, have you ever stopped to realize just how rare you are? Most people wake up after the damage, but you woke up during the setup, and that's exactly what has them trembling in silence. They never expected you to be alert while still sitting at the table. They thought you'd play your role. Stay confused. Keep nodding. Keep loving blindly until they got what they wanted. But somehow, you started seeing, you started sensing, you started discerning patterns in the storm before the storm ever hit. Do you know how powerful that is? While others only realize the manipulation after the fallout. You started connecting dots mid-game. You saw their passive aggression for what it was: control. You saw the smiles that hid sabotage. You heard the compliments wrapped in condemnation. And you said nothing. At first. Why? Because you were processing. Not panicking. Psalm 119:66 says, "Teach me good judgment and knowledge, for I believe in your commandments." That's what God gave you: discernment in the middle of disorder. You were still under attack, still in the room, still in the system, and still saw through it. How many people can do that? Let's look at Nelson Mandela, imprisoned for 27 years. Yet while still locked in, he mentally broke free. He understood the system that was trying to break him, and by the time he walked out, he had already overthrown the lie from within. Just like you didn't need to escape first to realize the truth. You saw it while being targeted. Have you ever wondered why your silence made them panic more than your words? Why your stillness became a threat? It's because they could feel your awareness growing. Your spirit shifted. And when the light in your eyes changed, their shadows got nervous. They could sense you knew. You didn't flinch, but you observed. You didn't run, but you remembered. You didn't retaliate, but you realized, and that chosen one flipped the entire script. Isaías 54:17 declares, "No weapon that is formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue that shall rise against you in judgment you shall condemn." That's the power you carried the moment your eyes opened. The weapons were still forming, but they started malfunctioning the second your awareness kicked in. Frida Kahlo, the iconic Mexican artist, suffered through a devastating injury and a toxic relationship. But instead of waiting for healing to realize the damage, she turned her pain into self-portraits that told the truth before anyone else could. She painted what she saw while still inside it. That's what you've done. Translated pain into clarity, confusion into vision. They were counting on your loyalty to keep you blind, counting on your kindness to keep you quiet, counting on your empathy to keep you small. But kindness is not blindness. And now, your presence has become a mirror, a terrifying one, because for the first time, they're looking into a reflection that doesn't lie to them anymore. What do you think scares a manipulator more? Your words or your awareness? It's always the awareness, because once you can see the pattern, you become immune to it. Their tricks don't work. Their silence doesn't wound. Their traps don't catch. You've become spiritually uncatchable. Proverbs 2:11-12 says, "Discretion will protect you, and understanding will guard you. Wisdom will save you from the ways of wicked men." That's exactly what guarded you in the trap you were surrounded. But you were protected by discernment. Remember Whitney Houston, surrounded by people who wanted her talent but not her healing. She often saw the trap, but too late. And yet, her story reminds us how costly delayed awareness can be. That's why your early awakening is not just a blessing, it's a shield. They didn't just lose control, they lost access. And that's what's truly burning them. You didn't need to scream. You didn't need to confront. Your stillness shouted. Your presence preached. And now they don't know what you'll do with what you know. That fear, that's their own judgment ringing in their ears. Luke 12:2, -3 reminds us, there is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. Your discernment was not your own. It was divinely assigned, and it exposed what needed to be seen on heaven's timing, not yours. Even Princess Diana discovered the trap while still inside it. She realized she had been chosen for a role, but not loved for her truth. And once she understood that, her very presence exposed a system far larger than herself. So here's the real question. Chosen one, now that you see it, what will you do? Will you move silently? Or will you lead others out with you? Will you let this revelation make you bitter or wiser? Because the power is no longer in their hands, it's in yours. Ephesians 5:11 says, take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. And that's exactly what you've done, not with noise, but with knowing. You are not just free, you are awake. And once a chosen one awakens mid-trap, the entire strategy collapses. That's what made you their worst fear. And their fear, it's the loudest confirmation of your divine evolution. Number 12, you didn't react. You rewired your understanding mid-battle. Chosen one, let's be honest, they set the stage for your meltdown. They laid every trap, lined up every jab, twisted every sentence waiting for you to explode. They needed it. They fed on it. Your reaction was the fuel to their fire. But when you didn't react, when you paused, when you recalibrated in the middle of chaos, that's when the ground beneath them cracked. Have you ever seen someone confused that you didn't take the bait? That's the spiritual earthquake you caused. They wanted instability, but you gave them stillness. They wanted emotion, but you gave them evolution. Eclesiastes 7:9 says, do not be quickly provoked in your spirit, for anger resides in the lap of fools. But you didn't just stay calm, you transformed under pressure, and that made you unreadable. You didn't respond with tears or tantrums. You responded with transcendence. That's not avoidance. That's elevation. Michelle Obama famously said, when they go low, they go high. But you didn't just go high, you went silent. And that silence thundered louder than anything they expected. They used to know how to trigger you. They had a map of your buttons, but God changed the wiring. They pushed and poked, but nothing happened. That's not just emotional control. That's spiritual recalibration. Your internal world shifted mid-battle, and they had no idea what to do with the new you. Matthew 5:9 says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. Peace is a weapon, chosen one, and you wielded it like a sword. Think about Oprah Winfrey. She was publicly humiliated in interviews early in her career, but instead of reacting emotionally, she transformed herself behind the scenes. She didn't just survive her critics, she outgrew their relevance. Your silence wasn't weakness, it was your spirit strategizing. The real war wasn't in what they did, it was in how you processed it. And you won. Romans 12:2 says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That's what you did in real time. No breakdown, no meltdown, just quiet renewal in the middle of the storm. Take Keanu Reeves. He's faced tragedy, loss, gossip, and yet he never reacts publicly. That restraint has made him one of the most respected people in Hollywood. Why? Because silence can't be manipulated. And now, they're off balance. Why aren't you fighting back? Why aren't you crying? Why aren't you begging for understanding? Because chosen one, you don't need to anymore. You don't need the last word. You already have the last peace. Proverbs 17:27 says, "The one who has knowledge uses words with restraint, and whoever has understanding is even-tempered." That's your power now. You became unreadable, unshakable, unapologetically calm, Beyoncé, in the face of career-threatening rumors. Often lets her work speak. She doesn't chase every headline. She doesn't correct every whisper. Her silence builds legacy. Yours is doing the same. So here's your question. When you're no longer reacting, but resetting, who really holds the power? It's not them. It's you. You didn't escape the battle. You transformed within it, and they'll never forget the day they couldn't provoke the person they once controlled. That's the day the manipulation died, and your divine peace was born. Number 3, they got addicted to a version of you that wasn't awake. Chosen one. Have you ever noticed how some people mourn your transformation, not because they love you, but because they lost control over you? It wasn't your love they cherished. It was your willingness to shrink so they could feel tall. They didn't crave your heart. They craved your silence, your softness, your submission to their unspoken rules. And now that you've awakened, their comfort is collapsing. They were addicted to the older version of you, the one who over-apologized for simply having boundaries, the one who gave endlessly without asking for reciprocity, the one who made excuses for red flags while calling them love. That version was easy to mold, easy to manipulate, easy to keep in emotional captivity. And if you're honest, for a long time, even you didn't realize how much you were bending just to be loved. But something happened, didn't it? A divina disturbance, a soul awakening, a quiet revolt within your spirit that whispered, enough. And chosen one, that whisper was the voice of God. Psalm 18:19 declares, "He brought me out into a spacious place. He rescued me because he delighted in me." That rescue didn't always look like freedom at first. Sometimes it looked like loneliness. Sometimes it felt like heartbreak. But it was deliverance. God was pulling you out of the role they had cast you in and placing you into the truth of who you really are. Have you asked yourself lately why your growth disturbs them so deeply? Why do they act like you betrayed them? Simply because you chose to see clearly? The answer is simple. They didn't love you. They loved your compliance. The old you was their playground. This new you, you're a fortress. Think about Maya Angelou. For years, her silence was survival. But when she found her voice, it became a global awakening. Her truth exposed systems and shook foundations. That's what your transformation has done. It didn't just free you, it revealed them, and now they feel abandoned. Not because you harmed them, but because you stopped carrying the emotional load they should have never placed on you to begin with. Your peace feels like betrayal to people who were benefiting from your chaos. Your distance feels like cruelty to people who abused your closeness. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." You weren't created to bleed endlessly just to prove your love. You were created to reflect God's love, and God's love includes boundaries. Let's not forget Prince Harry. His awakening didn't come quietly. It came with the cost of tradition, title, and public scrutiny. But when he chose to protect his family and his mental health, the world watched as old power structures crumbled. That's what happens when a chosen one breaks generational scripts. What bothers them now isn't that you've changed. It's that you changed too soon before they could extract what they wanted. You exited the narrative before the damage was complete. You rewrote your role before they had a chance to finish the manipulation. And that's what haunts them. Have you considered how many people only applauded you when you were convenient, when you were accessible, when you played small? They don't clap for your clarity. They don't cheer for your courage, because those things make them uncomfortable. 2 Corinthians 5:17 reminds us. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come, the old has gone. The new is here. That new version of you, confident, discerning. Holy is no longer a tool in someone else's agenda. You are not a character in their script. You are the author of your own chapter now. Let's talk about Simone Biles. When she stepped back from the Olympics to prioritize her mental health, critics screamed, but her stillness spoke louder than any performance ever could. She stopped entertaining pressure. She stopped playing through pain. And that act of self-respect changed how the world views strength. You've done the same. You've stopped performing. You've stopped apologizing for having needs. You've stopped saying yes when your spirit said no. And now they call you distant, cold, harsh. But what they really mean is, I no longer control you. John 8:32 says, then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. You didn't become mean. You became mindful. You didn't become bitter. You became brave. And now your freedom feels like punishment to those who were feeding off your bondage. So here's the question. Chosen one, who do you owe your loyalty to, your past or your purpose? Because while they mourn the loss of the version they manipulated, heaven is rejoicing over the version that finally woke up. Number 4. Their manipulation needed you to doubt yourself, but you've become self-certified. Chosen one. The strategy was never just about control, it was about confusion. They didn't want to physically overpower you. That would have been too obvious. Instead, they whispered doubts, slipped in subtle comments, planted questions that turned your clarity into fog. Are you sure? I think you're overreacting. Maybe you misunderstood. Sound familiar? That's how it starts. Not with insults, but with erosion. Slowly chipping away at your confidence until you needed them just to feel certain. They made themselves the judge of your reality. And they fed on the idea that you couldn't trust yourself without their approval. But let me ask you this. How dangerous must you be for someone to wage psychological warfare against your mind? What were they so afraid you'd figure out? The answer is simple. Your power, because a chosen one with clarity, is a threat to every system built on control. Proverbs 3:26 says, for the Lord will be your confidence and will keep your foot from being caught. You see, God never intended for you to doubt your discernment. That's why he started clearing the fog, removing the voices that made you question your worth. Consider Eleanor Roosevelt. She was once considered shy, awkward, and too uncertain to lead, but when she stepped into her truth, she redefined what First Lady meant. Her clarity reshaped policy and inspired a nation just like you. She went from self-doubt to spiritual direction. You no longer ask for permission to exist. You no longer need 10 explanations to trust your gut. And you definitely don't accept confusion as love. That's what's changed. You've become self-certified not because you're arrogant, but because you finally aligned with the truth of who God says you are. Romans 8:6 says, the Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children. You've stopped begging for validation from people who were threatened by your identity in the first place. And that has broken every lever of manipulation they once held. Let's look at Malala Yousafzai. They tried to silence her through fear, hoping to make her doubt her right to speak, to learn, to lead. But she became even more powerful once she trusted her inner voice over external threats. Your story mirrors hers more than you realize. They're losing their grip, not because you fought them, but because you ignored them, because you no longer flinch when accused, because you walk away without defending your name. That silence, that peace, it terrifies them. James 1-6 says, "But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind." Your spiritual foundation is no longer shaken by their storms. You've become anchored in truth. Think about Chadwick Boseman, quietly battling illness. He never let doubt take the driver's seat. He trusted his mission, not the world's opinions. He didn't need loud validation. His stillness became legendary. That's what you've become: unshakable. No more emotional levers to pull. No more gaslighting that sticks. No more false guilt that keeps you up at night. You've reclaimed the space in your mind they once rented for free. 1 John 2:27 says, "But the anointing that you received from him abides in you, and you have no need that anyone should teach you." You've graduated from needing their instruction. You are being taught by the Spirit now. So here's your reflection. Chosen one, what does it feel like to finally be free from the need to be understood? What weight have you lost simply by knowing who you are? You're not confused anymore. You're clear. And to those who profited from your self-doubt, that clarity is lethal. The spell is broken. The fog has lifted, and the real you has stepped forward, certified by heaven, unbothered by lies, and immune to manipulation. Number 5. You saw through the charisma and recognized the calculations. Chosen one, what do you do when someone's charm starts to feel like a strategy? When the warmth in their eyes suddenly feels premeditated, not sincere, when the way they speak seems tailored to get access rather than connection? You saw it, and that's when everything changed. In the beginning, they knew how to disarm you. The smile, the humor, the deep conversations, the stories about their past, it all seemed so real. Didn't it? But slowly, you started to feel something unsettling beneath it. Not fear, not confusion, just an unspoken contradiction. Their words were sweet, but the energy was stale. Their openness felt staged. Their kindness was too timed. Your spirit knew before your mind did. Something's off. Proverbs 26, 24, 25 says, "Enemies disguise themselves with their lips, but in their hearts they harbor deceit. Though their speech is charming, do not believe them, for 7 abominations fill their hearts." That's what you picked up on, not the charm, but the contradiction. What made you dangerous to them wasn't a confrontation, it was recognition. You didn't lash out or accuse them, you simply saw them. And once a chosen one sees, the mask slips. Think about Anna Sorokin, the infamous socialite who conned New York's elite. She had the clothes, the connections, the charisma, but eventually, someone saw the inconsistencies. One bank statement didn't add up. One story had a hole. That's all it took. Just one person to stop being impressed and start paying attention. That's what you did. You realized that what looked like vulnerability was actually a tool. They weren't sharing to build intimacy. They were collecting emotional currency to use later. They weren't being transparent. They were building a file on your emotions, your fears, your history. And once they knew where the cracks were, They applied pressure. But here's the thing, they underestimated your discernment. They thought you were still dazzled by the surface, still flattered by their selective attention. But chosen one, you carry the gift of divine perception, and when you activate it, no disguise survives. 1 Samuel 16:7 reminds us, the Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And when you're chosen, He gives you eyes to do the same. Do you remember when you stopped leaning in when they cried? When you didn't rush to comfort them during their growth moments or fall for their pattern of performative healing? That was the day their act failed. Because without your belief in their false identity, the illusion collapsed. Consider Elizabeth Holmes, the founder of Theranos. She built $1 billion empire on charisma, pitch decks, and promises. But eventually, someone stopped being enamored and started asking real questions. The fall wasn't caused by a storm, it was caused by someone who refused to confuse charm with credibility. You did the same. You saw the emotional bait and switch. You watched how they weaponized affection and timing. You stopped assuming sincerity just because the words sounded right. And that made you powerful beyond measure. Jeremiah 7:9 says, the heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? You didn't need to understand their whole backstory. You just needed to recognize the script. They got scared, not because you exposed them to others, but because you stopped playing along. You weren't reactive. You weren't cold. You were just unimpressed. And for someone who survives on admiration, that silence is unbearable. Let's talk about Meghan Markle. No matter what image the press tried to paint, she didn't defend herself at every turn. She walked away from the palace, literally, and that spoke louder than any statement. It unsettled people not because she shouted, but because she stopped engaging. You did the same. John 8:44 says, when he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. When someone thrives in manipulation, truth feels like a threat. That's why your perception unnerves them. You no longer confuse personality with integrity. Their fear now isn't about what you'll say. It's about what you've already seen. Because once you see the motive behind the smile, you can't unsee it. And once you recognize manipulation wrapped in charm, you become immune to it. Your energy shifted. You stopped getting drawn in. You stopped explaining your boundaries. You stopped needing their approval. And that silence has become their mirror. So here's the real question. Now that you see the difference between performance and presence, how many relationships in your life suddenly feel false? You're not cynical. You're just awake. And that makes you untouchable in a world where manipulation thrives on blindness. Number 6, you disarm them by refusing to compete in their psychological Olympics. Chosen one. Not every battle is meant to be fought. Some are meant to be exposed by your refusal to play. That's what broke them, not your rage, but your rest. They came with subtle jabs and spiritual traps, little pokes to your self-worth, shifts in tone, guilt-ridden z's, deliberate silences that begged for you to overreact. And for a while, you thought it was miscommunication. You thought if you just explained better, loved harder, or gave more space, the problem would resolve. But the problem was never you. You eventually saw the pattern. Everything was a game. And winning meant giving them control. Losing meant regaining your peace. So you chose to lose in their game and win in your soul. Isaiah 30:15 says, in repentance and rest is your salvation. in quietness, and trust is your strength. And that's the paradox they never saw coming. Your stillness wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Consider Taylor Swift. For years, she was baited by media narratives and personal attacks. But one day she stopped clapping back. She removed herself, reset, and returned with more clarity and impact than ever before. You did the same, vanishing from the fight, only to rise stronger than they imagined. The mind games don't work anymore. You're not jumping through hoops. You're not falling for the trap disguised as an apology. You're not spiraling because they went silent. You're centered. And that silence, that peace, it's louder than any argument could be. Proverbs 26, 20 says, "Without wood a fire goes out. Without a gossip a quarrel dies down." You stopped feeding the fire, and they're left with ashes and echoes of a game you no longer play. Have you ever noticed how nervous people get when they can't read you, when your reactions aren't predictable? That's because they built their manipulation on your emotional response. And now that you've mastered peace, they're lost. Let's look at Serena Williams. Critics threw everything at her comments about her body, her temperament, her right to exist in elite spaces. But her power wasn't just in her strength, it was in her focus. She didn't engage every insult. She focused on her lane, and that shattered every stereotype. James 1:19 urges, "Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." You've embodied that. You're no longer quick to defend or slow to leave. You listen, you discern, and then you decide on your terms. You didn't outtalk them, you outgrew them. And that's what unnerved them. Because when someone can no longer bait you into war, they're forced to battle their own shadows. Think of Anthony Bourdain. His success wasn't just talent, it was refusing to conform. He didn't compete in celebrity culture's games. He walked his own road, and the world respected him more for it. You've done that, spiritually left the game, kept your peace, and gained clarity. 2 Timothy 2:23 warns, "Don't have anything to do with foolish and stupid arguments, because you know they produce quarrels." You obeyed that, and now the storm has no effect on you, because you're not on the battlefield anymore. So here's the question. What would happen if you kept choosing peace even when provoked? Who loses power when you stop reacting? Your refusal to compete didn't make you weak. It made you untouchable. And when the noise faded, what remained was something they couldn't manipulate: your silence, your clarity, your divine identity. You didn't win by shouting. You won by walking away. And now, they're stuck playing a game you no longer acknowledge, exhausted, confused, and forced to face the mirror you left behind. Number 7. You didn't just survive the gaslighting, you reverse-engineered it. Chosen 1. There's something holy about the clarity you've developed. Because not only did you walk through the fire of gaslighting, you learned to trace the flames back to the very match that started it. You weren't just manipulated, you were studied, targeted, poked, and pushed until they thought you'd finally break. But you didn't break. You built a map. You followed every breadcrumb of confusion until it led you back to truth. Gaslighting isn't just emotional abuse, it's spiritual warfare. It's designed to fracture your connection with yourself, to distort your voice so that theirs becomes louder, and to keep you doubting what God already confirmed in you. That's what they wanted. They wanted you to forget what God told you, to distrust your intuition, to second-guess the discernment that's always been a gift in your soul. But here's what they didn't expect you remembered. Even when you were being told you were crazy, even when the stories kept changing, even when your instincts screamed, something's wrong. But the people around you kept saying, no, it's just you. End of Isaiah 41:10 reminds us, do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. And that's exactly what he did. God held your mind together while they tried to rip it apart. He shielded your sanity while they twisted your reality. Have you ever paused to marvel at how you survived that psychological maze? How you came out sharper, not weaker? Most people don't survive that kind of emotional war intact. But you did more than survive. You analyzed it. You tracked the cycles. You paid attention to how they smiled before they lied, how they paused when they were caught, how they changed the subject when truth got too close. You didn't just notice it, you decoded it. Look at the story of whistleblower Erin Brockovich. She wasn't a trained lawyer, but she saw the patterns others ignored. She noticed how people were getting sick, how paperwork didn't match the stories, how big systems were covering up environmental abuse. Like you, she didn't have all the evidence at first, but her gut knew, and her persistence exposed corruption on a massive scale. That's you now. You don't need their apology. You don't need their confession. You've seen the playbook. You've memorized the tactics, and what used to confuse you now confirms your discernment. Proverbs 3:21-23 says, my son, do not let wisdom and understanding out of your sight. Preserve sound judgment and discretion. They will be life for you. Then you will go on your way in safety, and your foot will not stumble. That's what your reverse engineering gave you, spiritual safety. You now see the game before it starts. They once had the upper hand because they knew your heart. They weaponized your compassion, your loyalty, your desire to make things right. They used your empathy against you. But once you realized love without truth is manipulation, the spell began to crack. Think about Monica Lewinsky. For decades, the narrative wasn't hers. She was painted by media manipulation, public shame, and half-truths. But years later, she reclaimed her voice. She exposed the cultural gaslighting that labeled her without context. And in doing so, she became a powerful voice for truth in the face of distortion. That's what you've done. You took your power back by recognizing that the story being told wasn't complete and it wasn't divine. God began reminding you of what actually happened. You remembered what was said. You remembered what you felt. And your memory, once attacked, became your weapon. John 14:26 tells us, but the Advocate, the Holy Spirit, will teach you all things and will remind you of everything I have said to you. That's what protected you while they tried to make you forget. The Holy Spirit brought things back to your remembrance, not to haunt you, but to heal you. Have you ever asked yourself why they get so uncomfortable now when they see you, why their stories get shorter, their tone more defensive, their energy unsettled? It's because they know you see them. Not the version they project, but the blueprint behind the behavior. You see the insecurity under the control. You see the lie before it's spoken, and they can't manipulate what you no longer absorb. Look at Tyler Perry. Raised in a household of emotional confusion and mental trauma, he channeled those patterns into storytelling that helped millions recognize their own cycles. He didn't just endure dysfunction, he studied it, reframed it, and eventually, he reversed it. You've done the same. You don't argue anymore. You don't beg for honesty. You don't plead for clarity. You simply step back, observe, and let their own inconsistencies speak for themselves. That's why they're afraid of you now, not because you fight, but because you don't have to. Ephesians 6:12 says, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." What you fought wasn't just deception, it was a spirit of confusion, and you conquered it without even knowing how deeply spiritual the battle was. You are not just someone who got away, you are someone who understands. And nothing scares a manipulator more than a person who not only escaped, but could explain the method. Remember Edward Snowden? He didn't just see injustice, he understood the infrastructure behind it. He didn't just whistleblow, he detailed the exact operations, exposing a system that relied on secrecy. That's the energy you carry now. You don't need to speak loudly. Your presence exposes the plot. So here's the question. Chosen one, what happens when the one they tried to silence becomes the one who understands the system better than they do? What happens when the targeted becomes the teacher? Romans 16:17-18 warns us. Watch out for those who cause divisions and put obstacles in your way. By smooth talk and flattery, they deceive the minds of naive people. You're no longer the naive one. You've become the one who teaches others what to look out for. And that's why they avoid you now. Not because you're dangerous, but because your clarity is now. Your presence makes them cautious. They hesitate to lie the same way. They fumble through their stories. They don't know how to charm you anymore. Because you've walked through their house of mirrors and you know exactly where the glass is warped. You've become immune. You've become awake. And most of all, you've become a mirror, a divine one, reflecting not only their lies, but your truth. And that is what breaks the cycle. Number 8. They can't weaponize your empathy anymore. You've aimed it toward yourself. Chosen one. What happens when the very thing they used against you becomes the thing that now protects you? For the longest time, your empathy was their entry point. It was the unguarded door they slipped through. Every time they violated your boundaries, they counted on your soft heart to keep the door unlocked. Every time they disrespected your time, your energy, your emotions, they leaned on your compassion to sweep it under the rug. They didn't need you to be heartless, they just needed your heart to be pointed in their direction. No matter the cost, they knew you were wired to forgive. They depended on your desire to see the best in people, and that desire, as holy as it is, became their favorite tool. Because the more you loved, the less they had to change. Why would they grow when you'd stay regardless? Why evolve when your loyalty made excuses for their immaturity? But something sacred shifted inside of you. You didn't stop being compassionate, you just started being fair. Not to them, to you. You realized that constantly giving to someone who only took wasn't empathy, it was self-abandonment. You woke up to the truth that loving someone doesn't mean losing yourself. Proverbs 4:7 tells us, the beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom, though it cost all you have. Get understanding. You gained that understanding the hard way, through sleepless nights, drained emotions, and being made to feel guilty for even having boundaries. Think of Princess Diana. Her empathy and compassion made her the people's princess, but behind palace walls, her kindness was often manipulated. Yet, over time, she began redirecting that love to herself and her children. Her self-preservation became her rebellion. You've done the same. You've reclaimed your care. You've redirected your energy. You're no longer the emotional rescue team for people who've chosen destruction as a lifestyle. Have you ever asked yourself why they seem so frustrated now that you're quiet? Why they can no longer cry on cue and receive access to your soul? It's because the power they had came from your emotional labor, and now that you've stopped giving it away, they're starving for the attention they used to manipulate. Isaiah 43:4 says, "You are precious and honored in my sight, and I love you." That verse isn't just a comfort, it's a standard. You are too precious to keep handing your tears to people who never offered you a towel. Take Rihanna. For instance, in her early career, her relationship made headlines, not for love, but for abuse. And yet, she turned inward, healed, built empires, and redefined her self-worth. Her strength didn't come from coldness. It came from choosing herself. Your journey mirrors that. You're not less loving, you're just loving you. 2. Your empathy now has discernment. You can listen without absorbing, care without collapsing, forgive without forgetting, and love without losing yourself in the process. That's divine balance. 2 Timothy 1:17 reminds us, "For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline." Empathy without discipline becomes a snare, but paired with God's wisdom, it becomes a sword of spiritual protection. Think of Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, a man known for his compassion, but always with boundaries. He was kind, not naive, gentle, not gullible. He knew how to connect, but he also knew when to protect his peace. You're becoming the same. A force of love guided by truth. And now, they can't guilt you. They can't twist your tears into permission slips. They can't play victim and expect you to play nurse. You've stepped into a new spiritual awareness, and they feel the door closing. Psalm 139:14 says, "I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made." And being wonderfully made includes having the wisdom to guard your heart. You were never created to be everyone's emotional filter. Now, the empathy they once exploited has become your armor. You aim it inward first, healing your own wounds, comforting your own spirit, giving yourself the grace you used to reserve only for others. Have you noticed how quiet they've become since your peace became non-negotiable? That's not coincidence. That's spiritual confirmation. You're no longer reacting, you're protecting. You're no longer rescuing, you're resting. And that rest, that internal peace, it terrifies those who thrived on your chaos. So ask yourself this, chosen one, what would happen if you kept all that compassion, all that understanding, and all that patience and offered it to yourself first? You're not selfish. You're finally spiritually aligned. And the moment you aimed empathy at your own soul, the chains broke. You're not just healed, you're protected. And no manipulator can weaponize what you now wield with authority. Number 9. You turned the emotional labyrinth into a blueprint for liberation. Chosen one. The chaos wasn't an accident. It was by design. Every contradiction, every shift in tone, every time they praised you one day and criticized you the next, it was all part of a deeper system meant to trap you. This wasn't just dysfunction, it was strategy. And they thought you'd stay lost in it forever. They wanted your mind spinning. They wanted your spirit drained. They wanted you questioning every move, every word, every emotion, so that you'd never have the strength to walk away. And for a while, you played along. Not because you were weak, but because you believed in resolution. You thought, if I just love harder, explain more, forgive deeper, we'll find our way out. On and for. But here's what they never expected. You started mapping the maze. Psalm 18:28 says, "You Lord, keep my lamp burning. My God turns my darkness into light. And he did. In the middle of that mental fog, your spirit started writing down the exits. You began noticing the love-bombing pattern, the way sweetness always showed up right when you were about to leave. You caught the delayed apologies, the fake vulnerability, the sudden humility when their control was slipping. You saw how blame was always flipped like a switch, and how your clarity was their biggest fear. Look at Russell Brand. He once spiraled in addiction and chaos. But over time, he studied the pattern. He now teaches others how to break free from cycles of destruction. Like you, he didn't just survive the emotional chaos, he translated it into clarity. You turned that labyrinth into a map. You no longer wonder, why did they do this? Instead, you understand exactly how and why. That understanding is dangerous to people who only had power in your confusion. 1 Corinthians 14:33 says, "For God is not a God of confusion, but of peace." That's your new standard. You're no longer chasing people who spin you in circles. You're following the path of peace. And anyone who brings chaos now disqualifies themselves from access. Think of Britney Spears. For years, her confusion was controlled. The system around her kept shifting the rules until she understood the trap, and when she finally spoke, the world listened. Her understanding became her freedom. Yours will do the same. Now, people get nervous around your clarity. You're no longer asking the same questions. You're teaching others how to spot the signs. You're not afraid of manipulation anymore. You can smell it. You're not heartbroken. You're informed. That's why they're rattled. Isaiah 61:3 says, "To bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning." You took the ashes of betrayal and built a blueprint of liberation. Let's not forget Malcolm X, raised in trauma, betrayal, and systemic confusion. He turned his pain into prophetic clarity. His voice rattled systems because it was backed by understanding. You've developed that same kind of holy insight. They thought you'd leave quietly, but you didn't just leave, you learned. You didn't just escape, you understood. You didn't just heal, you documented the path. And now, they fear who you'll teach next. Because you can tell the truth and explain the system. Romans 5:3-4 reminds us. Suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character. I hope your suffering wasn't wasted. It matured you. It opened your eyes. And now that you're walking in wisdom, you're unstoppable. So here's the question. Who's watching you now? Chosen one, who's learning from your breakthrough? Because your story isn't just about escape, it's about exposing the exit. You didn't just survive the chaos, you mapped it. And now, your truth is tearing down the throne they built on your disorientation. You are not confused anymore. You are chosen, called, and completely clear. Number 10. You outgrew the version of yourself they could control. Chosen one. There was a time when they didn't need to raise their voice or slam any doors to control you. All they had to do was frown slightly, withhold affection, go silent for a few days, or offer backhanded encouragement. Why did it work? Because you were still figuring out your worth. You were still hoping they'd see the goodness in you. Still afraid that being too much or not enough would cause rejection. And in that fragile phase, their opinion had weight it didn't deserve. They didn't hold power because they were strong. They held power because you were uncertain. You gave them access to a version of you that still needed external confirmation to feel secure. And that version of you was easy to bend, eager to please. slow to walk away, and always trying to earn what should have been freely given. You weren't weak. You were simply wired to love, and they saw an opportunity. Galatians 10 say, am I now trying to win the approval of human beings, or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I was still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. Your growth began the day you realized the approval you were chasing was never meant to define you. You started seeking validation from the source, not from the shifting opinions of those who only showed up to feed their egos. Let's look at Lady Gaga. Early in her career, she fought to be seen as worthy, not just as an artist, but as a woman with a voice beyond performance. But as she evolved, she stopped catering to expectations. Her most powerful moments came when she redefined herself on her terms, just like you. What they never saw coming was your inner transformation. You stopped needing applause. You stopped asking if you were good enough. You stopped trying to fix relationships that were only held together by your over-functioning. Instead of seeking their permission, you began walking in divine conviction. Isaiah 43:18-19 says, forget the former things, do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing, and that new thing is you, a clearer, bolder, unapologetic version who no longer shrinks to keep the peace. They're not angry because you've changed. They're panicking because you've evolved beyond their reach. Consider Robert Downey Jr., once buried in addiction and self-sabotage. He was constantly defined by his lowest points. But he didn't just recover, he reinvented. He outgrew the version of himself that others could mock and dismiss. You've done the same in the spiritual realm. You've outgrown their accusations, their manipulations, and their authority. Have you noticed how they keep trying the same tactics? But they land differently now. The old triggers don't sting. The silence doesn't shake you. Their disapproval doesn't derail you. That's not coincidence. That's evolution. 2 Corinthians 5:17 declares, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come, the old has gone. The new is here. You are not the same person who once sat quietly, hoping they'd change. You are no longer chasing after love you already carry within. Take the story of Malala Yousafzai. They tried to silence her while she was young, fragile, and seen as powerless. But she found her voice. She outgrew their control. And now she speaks truth to power. Your voice may not be on global stages, but your presence carries that same spiritual shift. Their manipulation depended on your confusion. Their authority depended on your self-doubt. But when your identity became rooted in God, not people, the entire foundation of their influence crumbled. You're no longer interested in performing. You've stopped auditioning for love. You're not proving anything anymore. You're simply being. Philippians 3:13-14 urges. Forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead, I press on toward the goal, to win the prize for which God has called me. You're no longer circling old cycles. You're ascending. And those who could only reach the old version of you are now left yelling into empty space. So here's your question. Chosen one, what would your life look like if you stopped answering to people who only knew the insecure version of you? How much higher would you rise? They don't miss you. They miss controlling you. And when they see you thriving without their commentary, without their praise, without their permission, it breaks their illusion. You're no longer breakable. You've become sovereign. You've become still. And in that stillness, their power ends. Number 11. You recognize that their mind games were a cry for relevance. Chosen one. when you finally saw their mind games for what they were not, power plays, but desperate attempts to stay emotionally relevant, you unlocked the final level of clarity. The manipulation was never about connection. It was never about building a future. It was about anchoring themselves in your thoughts, your heart, your daily emotional climate. They didn't care how they stayed, only that they did. That's why the arguments always escalated when you were doing well. Why they'd act distant when you felt confident. Why they'd drop vague insults wrapped in jokes. Their emotional instability wasn't random, it was a tactic. Confusion was the cord that kept you tethered. Proverbs 26, 18, 19 warns. Like a maniac shooting flaming arrows of death is one who deceives their neighbor and says, "I was only joking." You started noticing that every joke had a blade, that every moment of chaos came after your moments of peace. That was no accident. Think of Britney Spears. For years, her behavior was analyzed and mocked, while those behind the scenes pulled strings to keep control. It wasn't about her healing, it was about maintaining power. When she broke free, the world finally saw how calculated the chaos had been. You began noticing the pattern. When you were pulling away, they'd act vulnerable. When you were glowing, they'd manufacture a fight. Their actions weren't about love, they were about re-establishing dominance in your emotional space. Isaiah 54:17 reminds us, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue which rises against you in judgment you shall condemn." That includes psychological weapons. The war they waged wasn't physical, it was emotional warfare. But now you're immune to the bait. Have you wondered why your peace provokes them more than your anger ever did? It's because they thrived on your reaction, whether good or bad. It kept them centered in your world. Now that you're detached, they're experiencing what terrifies them most: emotional irrelevance. Look at the story of Meghan Markle. Her very presence challenged the system. When she stopped responding, stopped participating in the narrative others wrote for her, the attacks grew louder, but her silence became strategy. Yours has too. Psalm 112:7 says, "They will have no fear of bad news. Their hearts are steadfast." Trusting in the Lord, your heart is no longer tossed by their storms. You're steady, and that steadiness has become their undoing. Now they're throwing louder tantrums, not because they're hurt, but because they're unseen. You stopped taking the bait. You stopped analyzing their cryptic messages. You stopped chasing closure from someone who never planned to give it. And that, chosen one, is what ended the cycle. Think of Kobe Bryant. He didn't respond to every critic. He showed up and performed. His silence on distractions didn't mean he didn't see it, meant he saw something greater. You're focused now, and distractions no longer qualify for your attention. Romans 12:2 tells you, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." And you've done just that. Your mental energy is no longer available for recycled drama. Your clarity has become a shield. Your detachment has become divine. What's left is a manipulator with no audience. They're shouting into the void, replaying old tactics, waiting for a reaction that will never come. And the silence, it's exposing them louder than your words ever could. So let me ask you, chosen one, what would happen if you never explained yourself again to someone who thrives on misunderstanding you? You've reclaimed your mind. You've silenced the noise. You're not reacting, you're rising. And now, they must face the very thing they feared most: your absence. Number 12. You broke the illusion without announcing it. Chosen one. What happens when your most powerful move is your quietest one? You didn't storm out. You didn't cry in front of them. You didn't deliver a monologue or type a 12-paragraph text exposing their behavior. No grand speech. No dramatic confrontation. Just clarity. Quiet. Sacred clarity. And that clarity became your exodus. They were expecting something else. After all the emotional traps, the manipulation, the guilt loops, they thought they'd see you explode. That was part of the cycle, wasn't it? Pull you close, push you away, spark confusion, then spark a confrontation. But this time, you didn't bite, you didn't argue, you didn't flinch, you didn't give them a reaction, you gave them stillness. And chosen one, your stillness spoke volumes. Psalm 46:10 says, "Be still, and know that I am God." That's what you did in that silence. You connected with a divine knowing. You didn't need to expose them. God was already revealing them to you. And now, your silence has become their greatest discomfort. Think of Maya Angelou. When she discovered truths about the people around her, she didn't always react loudly. She wrote, she observed, she stood in elegance and let truth do what noise never could cut deeper. You've done the same. You didn't need to announce the awakening. You simply stopped playing the game. Have you noticed how uneasy they've become lately? How they fumble their words, repeat themselves, over-explain without you asking? It's because they feel the shift. You're still in the room, but your spirit has left the stage. You're no longer their emotional puppet, and they can't figure out when they lost you or how. Proverbs 17:27 tells us, "The one who has knowledge uses words with restraint, and whoever has understanding is even-tempered." That's not weakness. That's wisdom. The loudest moves in the spiritual realm often come in silence. Let's talk about Michelle Obama. Under relentless scrutiny, she rarely lashed out publicly. Her silence wasn't ignorance, it was strategy. She let her actions, her grace, her results speak for her. The same is now true for you. You're not answering chaos. You're outgrowing it. The real power isn't in calling them out. It's in disconnecting internally without warning. You didn't need to say, "I'm done." You simply were. And that unannounced closure became their torment. Have you asked yourself why they seem so uncomfortable around your peace now? Why your presence doesn't invite the same disrespect anymore? It's because they don't know how much you know. They don't know what moment changed you. And their biggest fear is that you're watching them with eyes that see everything now. Luke 8:17 says, "For nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be known and come to light." You didn't need to chase truth, it came to you. And now, even without a confrontation, you've exposed everything they tried to keep in the dark. Think about Chadwick Boseman. For years, he was battling illness in private, yet he continued working in silence, carrying divine strength. When people found out, they were stunned, not because he was weak, but because he was stronger than anyone imagined. You too have carried pain quietly and walked away powerfully. You didn't wait for closure because you didn't need permission to be free. You didn't need an apology to move on. The truth settled in your spirit. And once that truth arrived, so did your liberation. What confused them most was that you never yelled, you never fought, you just shifted. Isaiah 30:15 tells us, "In repentance and rest is your salvation. In quietness and trust is your strength." You walked away in quiet trust. And now, every boundary you hold, every time you choose peace over performance, You remind them without words that their control expired the moment you reclaimed your clarity. Think of Dave Chappelle. He walked away from a multi-million-dollar contract at the peak of his fame, not with scandal, not with rage, but with conviction. People didn't understand it at first, but he knew what was behind the curtain, and when he returned, it was on his terms. That's the spiritual level you're now operating on. Your presence doesn't feed their ego anymore. Your silence doesn't mean confusion, it means certainty. You're not pulling away in pain. You're rising in purpose. And they feel the difference. John 14:27 says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives." This isn't the world's version of closure, it's God's version. Silent, final, holy. Have you ever thought about how strong you had to be to hold all that revelation inside and still not retaliate? That level of emotional mastery is rare. That level of spiritual restraint is divine. They expected a scene, they got a mirror instead. And that mirror is you reflecting back every intention, every tactic, every mask. Let's not forget Malala Yousafzai. When she was targeted, she didn't respond with rage. She educated, elevated, and walked in purpose. Her calm threatened entire systems. Yours is doing the same. You're not exposing with your mouth, you're exposing with your movement. They can't figure you out anymore. You used to be predictable, now you're unreadable. You used to explain yourself, now you simply walk in clarity. That shift is what ended the performance. It's not that you didn't care, it's that you cared enough about yourself to stop participating. So here's your question, chosen one. What if your silence is the sermon? What if your detachment is the divine exit strategy? You're no longer available for guilt trips dressed as conversations. You're no longer handing out your empathy like open doors. You're not giving them the satisfaction of knowing what broke the illusion. Because the illusion didn't shatter from noise, it shattered from your stillness. Psalm 23:5 says, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." And now, as you sit quietly at that table, they don't know whether to fear your peace or beg for re-entry. The confusion they once inflicted is now their own. The paranoia they planted is now growing in their soil. You didn't walk away with a slam, you floated out with serenity. That's the kind of exit only the chosen can make. You didn't just break free, you broke the pattern. You didn't just end the cycle, you outgrew the game entirely. And now, as they replay old moments trying to pinpoint the exact second they lost access to you, your silence becomes their sentence. Because power doesn't always have to speak. Sometimes it just walks away and never looks back. Number 13. You became the unreadable variable in their carefully calculated equation. Chosen one. Have you ever realized how some people didn't love you? They measured you. They watched you the way a strategist watches a machine, not with affection, but with calculation. They studied your kindness, your tone, your timing, your tears. They logged your reactions like data points. To them, you weren't a person, you were a pattern, a series of predictable emotional responses they could manipulate, provoke, or shut down at will. Every silent treatment was a test. Every outburst was a rehearsal. Every moment of vulnerability was an experiment. They played it like a game of chess, and for a time, you were moving exactly how they predicted. They thought they knew your next 5 emotional moves, and honestly, maybe at that time, they did. Because your empathy made you open, your need for peace made you patient, and your hope for healing made you willing to stay. to explain, to keep trying. But then, something happened. Something divine. You stopped moving from emotional reflex and started moving from spiritual revelation. You woke up, chosen one, not just emotionally, but spiritually. You didn't just learn how they operated. You learned how you had been programmed to respond. Proverbs 3:5-6 tells us, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." You stopped leaning on instinct alone and began following divine direction. That's why they can't figure you out anymore, because your moves are no longer human. They're guided by spirit. Have you ever watched a chess player grow frustrated when their opponent refuses to follow the traditional rules? That's what you've become: unreadable. They counted on you, reacting with emotion. They relied on your guilt. They assumed your need for closure would always lead you back into the trap. But this time, you didn't react. You responded. Or sometimes, you didn't respond at all. Let's look at actress Winona Ryder. After being publicly vilified and misrepresented, she disappeared from the spotlight, not to sulk, but to rebuild. When she returned, it wasn't to reclaim approval. It was to walk in new purpose. You've done the same. You didn't just walk away. You evolved while they were still playing the old game. They're still trying to decode your silence, thinking it's strategy. They don't realize it's peace. They think your absence is punishment, but it's actually protection. Protection for your spirit, your mind, and your calling. Isaiah 55:8 reminds us, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways." That's where you now operate from a higher plane. They're still playing on the ground while you've ascended in spirit. Your unpredictability isn't instability. It's intelligence, it's discernment, it's sovereignty. And to people who built control systems based on your past patterns, that's terrifying. Because without the blueprint, they can't anticipate. Without your emotional transparency, they can't bait. Without your forgiveness on demand, they can't reset the cycle. Think of Michael Jackson, behind the scenes. He was deeply misunderstood. But when he stepped away from interviews and let his art speak, the world was left to interpret without access to his heart. You're doing the same. You've withdrawn your access, and they're spiraling in the silence. Luke 21:15 says, "For I will give you words and wisdom that none of your adversaries will be able to resist or contradict." That divine wisdom is what now guides your every move. You no longer need to explain. You don't argue your value. You simply be, and in that being, you disrupt their entire strategy. Have you asked yourself why they're now more emotional than you? Why their guilt tactics have grown louder? Their baiting more desperate? It's because the one they used to read like a manual has now become a mystery. Think about Zayn Malik, who walked away from the global sensation One Direction at the height of his fame, not for drama, but for peace. The world couldn't understand it, but his unreadable silence wasn't rebellion, it was rebirth. Just like yours. You don't beg for closure, you create your own. You don't chase after understanding, you rest in discernment. You don't try to fix what broke you, you use it as the foundation for your next level. 1 Corinthians 2:15 tells us, "The person with the Spirit makes judgments about all things, but such a person is not subject to merely human judgments." They can't judge you anymore. They can't label what they no longer have access to. Your evolution put you in a realm their tactics can't touch. Let's talk about Keanu Reeves, famously private and unpredictable. He moves in peace. humility, and divine timing. No one knows what he'll do next, and that mystery has become his greatest protection. You've stepped into that same territory. You're no longer in their lab, under their microscope. You've exited the experiment entirely, and now they're stuck using an outdated manual to control a version of you that no longer exists. They try the guilt, it doesn't stick. They try the charm, it feels empty. They try the silence, but you're already miles ahead in purpose. Philippians 4:7 says, "And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." That peace has made you unreadable, not because you're hiding, but because you're covered. You are not functioning from trauma anymore. You are operating from truth. You are not being pulled by emotional strings. You're being led by divine assignment, and that makes you the kind of person no manipulator can touch, decode, or predict. So here's your question. Chosen one, who are you now that they can't define you by your reactions? Who are you now that you move in purpose, not people-pleasing? You've upgraded, and they're still playing the beta version of a game that no longer exists. The rules changed when you stopped explaining yourself. The board flipped when you chose elevation over engagement. And now, they're not just confused, they're obsolete. You're not broken, you're built. You're not lost, you're led. And you're no longer walking in circles. They're just watching you from behind, wondering when you became the one piece they could never calculate. Number 14. Your stillness is no longer submission, it's authority. Chosen one. There was a time when your silence was misunderstood, even by you. You used to wonder if staying quiet meant you were weak, or if your refusal to respond was giving them the upper hand. But now, you know better. Your stillness is no longer submission. It's sovereignty, it's strategy, it's power wrapped in peace. And it's speaking louder than any words ever could. They thought your silence meant fear, that you were scared to speak, scared to confront, scared to assert yourself. They misread your stillness as weakness, not realizing it was wisdom. They thought your lack of reaction meant confusion, when in truth, it was clarity. And what they failed to understand is this: the most dangerous person in the room is the one who sees everything and chooses to say nothing. Eclesiastes 3:7 says, "A time to be silent and a time to speak." You've learned to discern the difference. You've realized not every insult deserves a response. Not every trap deserves a counterattack. Some things don't need closure, they need distance. And that's the level you're operating on now. Have you noticed how your peace unsettles them more than your arguments ever did? How the calmer you are, the more chaotic they become. That's because the game only works if you engage. And you've stepped off the battlefield, not in defeat, but in divine dignity. Think about Barack Obama. Throughout his presidency, he endured ridicule, attacks, and manipulation. But his strength wasn't in shouting back. It was in responding with measured calm. That composure didn't mean he was indifferent. It meant he was rooted, like you. His silence became a symbol of unshakable authority. You're not avoiding conflict anymore. You're choosing battles worthy of your breath. You've stopped talking to be understood by people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You've stopped exhausting yourself for people who only listen to respond, not to grow. Your silence is not passive, it's prophetic. Isaiah 30:15 tells us, "In quietness and trust is your strength." You've tapped into that holy strength, that spiritual stillness, and now they don't know how to pull you back into the chaos. The bait doesn't work. The guilt doesn't stick. The arguments feel empty. Remember Beyoncé during the release of lemonade. She never spoke publicly about her personal revelations. She let the art speak. Her silence wasn't compliance, it was power. You've learned that same rhythm. You don't need to scream. You vibrate at a frequency they can't reach. What confuses them now is your restraint. Why aren't you fighting? Why aren't you explaining? Why aren't you trying to fix it like before? Because, chosen one, you've evolved. You've realized that your energy is your currency, and you've stopped making donations to manipulation. Psalm 62, 5, 6 declares. Yes, my soul, find rest in God. My hope comes from Him. Truly, He is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress. I will not be shaken. That fortress is what surrounds you now. It's not built from walls, it's built from boundaries. And no, you don't need to explain those boundaries to people who only want to cross them. Let's talk about Greta Thunberg. When she first spoke, the world tried to shout her down, but her silence in moments of attack became her greatest statement. When she doesn't clap back, it's not because she's unsure, it's because her purpose is bigger than someone else's opinion. You're walking in that same spiritual posture now. Every time you say nothing, it rattles them. Every time you hold your boundary without offering a reason, it burns their strategy. Because now, they can't twist your words. They can't spin your silence. They're left shouting into an echo chamber of their own noise, and it's deafening. Proverbs 29:11 says, "Fools give full vent to their rage, but the wise bring calm in the end." You're not ignoring them, you're preserving you. That calm isn't absence, it's presence, a strong, holy presence that says, "I don't need your approval to exist." Look at Serena Williams. In the face of unfair criticism, she often let her stillness speak louder than her rebuttals. Her performance on the court became the answer. Like her, you've stopped arguing for your place. You own it. And now, they're the ones unraveling. Because the dynamic depended on your reaction. Without it, the manipulation falls flat. The cycle ends. And you've become a mirror they can't control. 1 Peter 3-4 says, "Rather, it should be that of your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight." That gentle spirit is not passive, it's powerful. It's the strength of someone who could react but chooses not to. Have you noticed how quiet strength confuses people who only understand control through chaos? Why they lash out harder the more calm you become? It's because they need your emotional response to feel relevant. Without it, they feel invisible, and your stillness has become their unraveling. Think about Nelson Mandela. His years of silence weren't submission, they were strategy. When he finally spoke, his words shifted nations. You're not silent forever. You're just not speaking on things that no longer deserve your voice. So here's your question. Chosen one, what would it mean to keep your stillness, even in the face of provocation? What if your silence is the strategy that secures your next spiritual level? You're no longer explaining your intuition. You're no longer defending your worth. You're no longer softening your truth to make others comfortable. Your silence is no longer a pause, it's a pronouncement. A declaration of inner stability, a boundary set by heaven. You didn't go silent to escape. You went silent to rise. And that stillness, it carries the echo of everything they didn't expect. Strength, wisdom, and the final confirmation that their access to your soul has expired. They thought they'd win with noise, but you're winning with peace. And that peace, that sacred, unwavering peace, it's louder than any of their chaos. You didn't walk away shouting, you walked away, centered. And now the noise behind you is nothing more than the sound of control collapsing. In the end, chosen one, what they feared most wasn't your rebellion, it was your revelation. It wasn't your rage that broke their grip, it was your stillness. It was the moment you stopped defending yourself and started defining yourself. You didn't slam the door, they just realized it was never theirs to walk through again. You didn't fight for revenge, you fought for returning to your truth, your worth, your peace. You didn't burn bridges with fire, you simply let silence speak. And the truth did what truth always does, set you free. You didn't just outgrow the game, you dismantled it with grace. You didn't expose them by shouting, you exposed them by outlasting them. And now, your presence is a quiet storm, not because you're trying to prove anything, but because you've stopped proving everything. You've learned that peace is not passive, it's prophetic, and you wear it like armor. So, as you walk forward, walk in full awareness that you are no longer who they mistreated, misunderstood, or manipulated. You are no longer reacting, you're leading. You are no longer accessible to confusion, emotional theft, or counterfeit love. You are moving in the authority of someone who's been through spiritual war and came out crowned in discernment. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. Whether you watched all 14 messages or just this one, your presence here means more than you know. This wasn't just content. This was soul surgery. And the fact that you stayed, wrestled, reflected, and grew with each word proves you're not who you used to be either. If this message ministered to your soul and you feel led to support the work, you can donate through the Super Thanks button right below this video. It helps us continue creating, editing, and delivering these messages to others who are still finding their way. But whether you donate or not, please hear this. I am deeply grateful for you. Your attention is a gift. Your time is a seed. And your healing is the harvest. Before we go, let me speak this blessing over you. May the peace that now guards your heart become a fortress no lie can breach. May your silence speak volumes in rooms where you used to shrink. May your discernment sharpen like a sword. May your boundaries remain sacred. And may every manipulator who thought they knew your next move watch in awe as you rewrite the entire strategy. You are chosen. You are covered. And you are no longer in survival mode. You are in divine positioning. Your next chapter isn't revenge. It's reign. If this message confirmed something in your spirit, let me know in the comments. Drop your reflections. Type, "I'm walking in authority," and speak that truth into the atmosphere. And if you know someone else waking up from manipulation into maturity, share this word with them. Don't underestimate the power of your obedience. Someone's deliverance could be one share away. I love you all. And more importantly, God loves you fiercely. Until next time, chosen one, stay clear, stay grounded, stay free, and above all, stay powerful in your silence. God bless you.